All right, we are recording. This is the SIG Network meeting for Thursday, August 9th, 2018. And also, as usual, I will post the agenda into Zoom chat. If anybody doesn't have it, there's the agenda. Looks like we have a pretty light agenda today, but also feel free to add more agenda items to the bottom of the agenda document. If you have anything else, I see we have a new CoreOS agenda item open there. But anyway, let's get started. The first item is the test dashboard. And actually, we probably don't have to do much here because I took a look earlier today and the test grid looks pretty good. The only red tests that we have that are significantly failing. The first one is all the Kube ones, and that is actually already being handled and may already be fixed today. So we don't care about that one anymore. And the other one is the E to E GCI GCE, or all the NetD tests. Those are, I think, fairly recently added tests, and they are failing. I debugged some of those. They all look like they're the same problem, and I think we'll just have to poke the people responsible for those tests to figure out what needs to happen there. If anybody wants to take up debugging that test, that's fine. Otherwise, we can let it go for another week or two and see. I don't think I'm going to be able to get to it more than the debugging that I've done. But overall, I think we're looking pretty good. A lot of the tests that we had either got removed or got fixed. And so I don't think we have much to worry about here for the test grid at this point. So with that, let's move on to Windows support feature. So Patrick, you're up.
Hey.
Are you able to share your screen, or would you like me to share the screen?
No, I go ahead and share it.
Okay.
Hold on just a second here. Let's make sure this works right.
Yeah, if it doesn't. Yep, I can see it. Should be good.
Okay, cool. Trying to get rid of the Zoom meeting infinite mirror thing. So it looks okay. You can see the web browser there.
Yes, we can. Yep, it's on an issue list right now.
Yeah, okay. I just moved over to the dock. I was just taking a quick look to see what was open that was network related. So basically, where we're at is, we've been working on Windows support for, the little over 2 years now. It initially started and reached alpha towards the end of 2016, and then we reached beta last year. And so from a networking standpoint, over the last year, we've got a couple different code bases that have started up for supporting different CNI plugins. And so I have some of those linked over in the document here. But what I'm basically looking for is I'm trying to go to all the SIGs that are sort of stakeholders in this and get some feedback on what we need to have in release criteria to basically graduate Windows support from beta. So the current progress right now is that all the main features that that are relevant to Windows, we're not going to implement things like SE Linux because we're not running Linux processes, of course, are pretty much done. And so we're just sort of fixing a tail of bugs and in the process of getting our upstream tests merged. So those will be coming on within the next few weeks here after a few discussions with SIG testing. So basically what I'm looking for is whether or not there's any any questions or areas of concern from SIG Network, and whether or not you want to designate a reviewer to work with us on this process, because this is the first time anyone has ever added another OS node support to Kubernetes.
Okay. Yeah. One of the questions I had was, what are the targets for Windows support with respect to Windows versions? Because I know from some of the reviews I've done and some of the other stuff that I've looked into on the Windows side, the containerization and behavior, especially on the networking side, heavily depends on what kind of or which Windows versions you have and whether Hyper-V and other stuff is being used or not. So I'm just kind of curious, are you cutting off support for some of the older releases? Are you going to try to standardize on something that has, for example, like the shared network infrastructure between different containers, or also support the older stuff that requires a separate network infrastructure per container?
Yeah. So, I mean, basically for the supported version, we want to focus on Windows Server version 18.03 and newer. I think most customers are going to want to actually use Windows Server 2019 because that's one that Microsoft is going to support for a full 5-year life cycle rather than 18 months. And so that has support for the network compartments. And so you'll be able to get your typical pod and service networking topology and kube proxy running on Windows. And you'll be able to do that using plugins for either VXLAN encapsulation or no encapsulation, and just doing sort of a programmed routing topology if you want to do that using something like Calico and Flannel. And of course, we're going to have the Azure specific CNI plugin. And I don't know have you been involved in the OVN Kubernetes work as well, or is that just Rajat?
No, I've been involved in it with him a little bit, though he's been the main driver of that.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, and so that of course will work with Open Virtual Switch underneath. But basically the focus is around 2019 and newer. The older OSs are going to have some missing capabilities. In particular, like on storage, there's also problems where like secrets don't work on Windows Server 2016, and there's no way for us to fix it, but it does work in the newer releases.
Okay. Is there any possibility then to, have kind of like a hard cutoff and then be able to remove some of the workarounds or code that existed to handle like 2016 and releases like that? Or do you intend to or hope to keep that around for existing users?
That's a good question. Let me discuss that a little more with SIG Windows to see if there is anybody that would like to use the older versions at a reduced capability. My preference would be to cut off and switch to 2019. So that way that could align with Kube 1.12 or 1.13, whichever one meets, the criteria that we land on.
Okay. Yeah.
That, so.
The only concern I had here was maintainability from some of the code and the patches, especially in the networking side that I've seen. There have to be some, I guess I won't call them hacks, but there's some significant behavioral differences in Kubernetes network code, and so maybe trying to harmonize those would be useful from a maintenance burden on people who work in the network code. But again, that code already exists, and those differences already work. So it's not like we need to do anything different. It would just be nice to potentially clean some of that up.
Yeah, I also think that once you move over to CNI 0.4 or whatever the next version is, I think that'll give us a chance to clean some of that up as well. Specifically because in the case of like the DNS configuration, the way that's done on Linux today is netc resolve.conf is created and placed in the pod sandbox. Well, Windows doesn't have that file. So we're basically using the capability arguments to pass the needed DNS information in. And so that's a PR that's going to be coming through in a few days here. But like that's an example where by putting that back into the runtime config in a new CNI spec, we're going to be able to get rid of some of those workarounds.
Okay, cool. Does anybody else have any questions, thoughts here? Do you want to talk a little bit about Docker shim versus Containerd, Patrick?
Yeah, I can. So at this point, we're still planning to support Docker shim at least through the 1.12 cycle. the work on Container D is moving along, but it's been a bit slower. One of the difficulties we've been having with Container D is there are still some areas that are sort of being redesigned. And so we've had a few setbacks in terms of getting some of that done. But at this point, it is working for running containers, but the work on the portion has not really started yet. Looking over the CRI code recently, there's still a lot of things that are doing Linux-specific path handling and things like that that need to be worked through. So I don't think we're going to see container or CRI Container D until probably later this fall, maybe winter.
Okay. Any other questions or thoughts?
Oh, the other thing I want to call out is, I don't know how commonly it's used on Linux, but Windows doesn't support sharing the network namespace with the node itself. So that's just a feature difference there.
Okay, that one might be interesting because I know of quite a few use cases that do host networking. And often some of the network plugins themselves will end up using host networking because they need to do the configuration directly on the host. But
exactly. Sorry, this is Tim. So there's a whole lot of really interesting stuff around Windows and compatibility with the Kubernetes API that we don't need to go into here, but the Royal we have to go into at some point. And knowing full well that there's a bunch of Linuxisms that have made their way into the pod API, and that's sort of unfortunate, but I guess was a known trade-off at the time. How do you expect, with no like host network, how do you expect like bootstrappy sort of containers that set up networking to be able to operate?
So there's a couple different approaches that we can do here. So one of them is that all of the networking control plane stuff can be configured remotely. So like after you create a virtual NIC that's going to be used for for the pod, you can't necessarily reconfigure it using the same network APIs from inside the pod, but it would be feasible to have something like a networking controller connect using what's called WinRM. You could think of it as being, I guess SSH isn't really a good analog, but it's an RPC-based management framework. Of course, you also work with RPC over HTTP. But basically, the way I could see that happening is doing a connection back to the host with a certificate or stored credentials to go and be able to make those changes. Because then you could go, enumerate the NICs, and then if you wanted to do things like, program some extra static routes and things you would typically do in IP tables, you could do it through remote management back to the host. So you could still have something running as a daemon set that is able to, have enough Kubernetes access through RBAC to get those additional things that are needed, and then talk back to the Windows host. The other thing we can do that I'll have to check if I don't think it's hooked up yet, is we can also do named pipes, which are sort of like a Unix domain socket. So if instead you wanted to have an agent running on the node itself, then that could have a non-network based transport available to whatever's running in that daemon set pod.
Okay, I don't have any concrete examples off the top of my head because all the ones I keep coming up with are Linux specific. But it would be interesting as you guys plow through to see if any of those cases crop up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the most likely one would be, I don't remember, I'm forgetting whether it was Calico or Flannel, but getting Felix running would probably be a good use case. And that's one where we'd probably have the Windows-specific code still wrapped up in a container, running in a daemon set, and then doing the loopback connection back to the node to handle the network plane config.
Thanks.
So what are the next steps here, Patrick? You mentioned earlier that you wanted reviewers and then perhaps some kind of formal approval, or at least uh, no further concerns from the SIGs.
Yeah, and so I'd like someone to go through it and at least review this. And I mean, I don't know if you or Tim are the best person for that, but then I'd like to respond to those, make sure it's clear in the doc, and then send a list to mail. Send in the mailing list and just sort of get an acknowledgement saying, okay, the doc's closed. We understand what's there, and once all these things are met, then we're okay with it.
Okay. Actually, one other thing that I don't see explicitly called out here. Well, actually, you do talk about testing.
Mm-hmm.
Are those integrated, or will they be integrated into like the SIG network test grid at some point? Are we actually able to do that now?
Yes. So we will be able to get a PR there. If you've got a link to the tests you're most interested in, that would be helpful. So far, we've been focusing on the Node EDE tests, which indirectly covers some of the networking. So are you looking for something that's more specific, like what were your notes for today?
No, not specifically, but I was thinking in terms of what Tim mentioned earlier. That there are a number of guarantees that Kubernetes kind of makes right now. Some of those may end up being Linux specific just because of history and whatnot. But making sure that as many of those guarantees as are generally accepted that Kubernetes provides, making sure that the Windows code also provides those guarantees, so that people aren't confused about well, on the Linux side I can do this, but on the Windows side I can't do that.
Okay.
But then the test might also make it more explicit, what limitations or what further capabilities the Windows code has.
Mm-hmm.
There's two things there. One is the conformance, which was actually the topic, or one of the topics at SIG Architecture today. So I suggest maybe starting to attend that to make sure you keep track with the evolution there.
Okay.
The other part is sort of the evolution of the API. It's clear that there's a bunch of facets of the API pod specifically that just won't make sense in Windows. I haven't seen sort of an analysis of what those are and what it means if we just start ignoring those. I don't know if that analysis has been written. I certainly haven't been tracking the SIG Windows work very closely myself. But at some point, I would like, or we will need to do a deeper review of sort of the implications of that, whether there's any fields that are marked as required that are being ignored, or whether we can just ignore only optional fields, and what the evolution of the API would look like to stop making that so horrible.
I see. Yeah, so we do, from a conformance standpoint, let me see if I could find it. I may not be able to find it real quick, but we do have a list of all the conformance tests, and I have a list of ones that we're basically ignoring within SIG Windows because they're covering Linux specific functionality. But I don't know if I have that.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't at all be surprised if you've got pretty high pass rate.
Yeah.
Topic at SIG Architecture today was how to vastly increase the number of conformance tests.
I see.
Specifically around pod and node.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would be to everybody's best interest for you guys to be involved.
Okay. All right, sounds good. Thank you. So that's all I had, and I'll just list the follow-ups in the meeting notes real quick, so you can move on. Thanks.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. All right. Oops, and I forgot to tag this with me. So the next item was I'm sort of looking around for the right place to put the V1 of the multi-network CRD spec, and I was wondering if the Kubernetes community SIG network pages is one place that could live. I also thought about the CNI repos, or a new repo in the CNI organization, because the spec does namespace itself sort of underneath CNI, but at the same time, the spec tries very hard to not be specific to CNI and to be implementable by plugins that do not necessarily implement all of the CNI bits. So I wanted to kind of put that question out to SIG Network and ask if people thought that it would be okay to host those things, or if they thought that maybe those should go elsewhere. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Queued up for review, but I just got back yesterday, so I haven't had a chance to read it yet.
Okay.
I'm not sure what we're doing yet with respect to CNI and the sort of evolution of CNI with kubeproxy, that idea, versus whether CNI should be part of the runtime or not part of the runtime. So I'm really pulled in about 8 different directions on this idea, which would at least initially lead me to say it probably shouldn't get any official nod until we got some clearer answers to those things. Putting it with CNI seems reasonable as a starting place.
Okay, that's fair enough, and I could do that. So let's take that approach for the moment. All right, next up, Core DNS. Francois, you're up.
Hello. Yes, it's just for precision. In fact, there was 2 weeks ago, I saw that Core DNS right now is GA, but it's not the default DNS server of Kubernetes. It is still kubedns, and we said in the KEP that we wait to have some feedback to have to move to default. Also because it needs to deprecate kubedns. But we have 2 processes happening at the same time. I mean, the KEP that was during last release of Kubernetes, we had 2 KEP for Core DNS, one to go GA and one to go default. But on the same time, looks like there is a feature issue that is opened by Justin Augustus, which follow I understand, the old way to promote or to graduate the features. Okay, so I was not sure which one to follow. I sent an email last week. I think, Tim, you were a target of this email. Justus also, but I had no reply. I just wanted to let you know what happened right now. I am thinking to follow still the KEP that expect to have some feedback before graduate as default. So we build a survey to have some feedback. Right now we have about 20 person replying that survey. I still try to push to have some more replies.
I think that's great.
So I am more on the target right now to be default, not in 1.12 that finish end of this month. I mean, the code freeze is end of this month, more in 1.13. Is that okay, Tim?
That's okay. Why not 1.12?
Oh. But what do you expect that because this KEP, if we look at it, I don't know if I can share my screen. Maybe I can share my screen. Share the screen. This KEP is accepted, is said criteria. We need a certain number to be defined of cluster of significant size to be defined, adopting and running Core DNS. So right now I'm collecting the information, but I don't know what is the real criteria. Okay. I don't know. Do you think that we should push for 1.12, which means we need in the 2 coming weeks to have KubeUp defining Core DNS as default, and we will have all the end-to-end tests switching to Core DNS. That's what we'll have.
So it would be great to have a PR open that did all that work, so we could see that the CI and everything is going to be happy. We expect that it will be. I don't know what the results of your survey are yet. Obviously, I haven't seen it if it's in my mailbox.
The survey, no, but I can compile a result as of today and send it.
Sure. I mean, what I don't want is to say, well, we had 10 people who each run 3 nodes tell us that it was fine, right?
Yes.
I'd like to know that given clusters of a few hundred nodes, that people are having good success with it.
Yeah, so maybe one has few hundred nodes, but not so much. I will send you. I will analyze the survey and send you back.
Yeah,
And,
please. I honestly, if it's in my mailbox, it's buried with 300 or 400 other messages right now.
What is the method then?
You can hit me on Slack, or you can ping me on Hangouts or something. Or honestly, if you respond to the email, it'll probably pop to the top of my mailbox. I'm trying to handle them in more priority order. And that way I can maybe, we can bring more publicity to it, retweet it, or scream from a louder mountain or something.
Okay. All right, so what I understand is, okay, let's push for this survey, verify that we have a PR that make core DNS as default a PR open, and then we decide if we push the PR or not before the code freeze. Is what you say.
Yeah, it would be great. I mean, if everything's in order, it would be a shame to miss 112 just because we didn't press hard enough for it.
Okay.
This is Minhan. I vaguely remember there's one API is not compatible with core DNS. It's the DNS config on the pod spec. Are we planning to address that, or is it going to say, okay, that field is going to be optional? Or
so yes, I don't. So I'm not aware of that. Which API you say?
There's a I think it's the DNS config API on the pod spec.
Can I? So what's your name? I will maybe talk to you to understand what is the point.
Sure. Just like let me type my name. Yeah. All right.
And okay, so I will contact you maybe by Slack so we find that, because I'm not aware of that, and maybe we'll fix it. I mean, if it's not fixed, we will fix it.
Okay.
DNS config API. Okay, Slack question. Okay, then I will push on it, as you said.
Let's make that a priority, yeah.
So just a quick question on that API. Is that one that's used by CNI or who's the caller in that case?
Of the DNS config API?
Yeah.
I think if Minhan's talking about the same API that I'm thinking about, it's people who want non-default search paths, or they want to trade off search paths for NDOTs or things like that.
At this point, all that DNS config is handled by Kubelet or something else, Patrick. So it doesn't really intersect with CNI. But I think one of the long-standing opens that we've had is to allow Kubelet to consume DNS information that might be passed back from CNI. How that interacts with core DNS and the other stuff, I'm not quite sure yet. But currently, it is not part of anything CNI related.
Okay. I'm just asking because I'm about to change how the kubelet interacts with CRI and CNI. So if there's something changing, just let me know. Thanks.
All right. Are we done with core DNS then?
I think, yes.
Okay. Thank you. And that is the end of the meeting agenda. Was there anything else that anybody wanted to bring up? All right. If
Oh,
not,
wait a minute, Dan. Wait,
go ahead.
It took a while to find my mute button.
Go ahead, Mike.
Did we touch on the multi-network CRD?
The agenda item there?
Yes.
Yeah, we did,
Okay.
and decided to put that in a CNI-related repo instead of under the SIG network community repo. So the question was just about, what repo should it go in so that there's a, more easily available public record of V1 of the spec.
I'm gonna try to take a look at that ASAP so that I can weigh in on anything that I've been ignoring for the last 6 months. And if we want to put it in SIG network, I don't really have an objection to that. But the last time I looked at it, it was pretty coupled to CNI, so it might make more sense in the CNI space. So that's what I want to go back and reevaluate.
Yeah, and that's fine. We did change a lot of that to be less CNI specific. There are basically the base spec itself is not CNI specific, and then there are sections that are CNI specific that do not need to be implemented by a plugin that does not call other CNI plugins. So for the V1 spec, whatever implements it currently is a CNI plugin, but if you do not delegate to other CNI plugins like Multis or CNI Genie or something like that, then you don't need to implement any of that really core CNI stuff. So it has been genericized quite a bit. And one of the things we're looking at for V2 is making that a little bit more generic and perhaps not requiring the implementation to actually be a CNI plugin. So that might more easily allow things like a device plugin that implements the spec but isn't CNI. But
Quick
that's
question.
all V2. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you guys still have CNI fragments in the network CRD?
Yeah, the config field is still CNI specific configuration, but it is not required. The config field is not required, and the language around plugin and all that kind of other stuff was taken out like a month or so ago or 2 ago. So it's possible to implement the spec and the network objects without having CNI specific stuff in them.
So on this topic of where it goes, it seems to me this thing is primarily a Kubernetes document. It has no meaning or use outside the Kubernetes context.
Yeah, that is true. And that was one of the reasons why I was thinking maybe Kubernetes community would be a good place for it.
So I don't have a problem with that. Like I said, the last I looked, it was pretty CNI coupled, but if that's been fixed up a lot, then maybe that's fine.
Okay. I mean,
well, I think it remains very CNI coupled, but it's about a way of very, very broadly speaking, it's about a more general way of using CNI from Kubernetes. But it's primarily, first and foremost, it's about doing something in Kubernetes.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, either one's fine with me. I just want to throw it up somewhere for the moment. So path of least resistance is fine. And then, if we want to move it to one or the other, I'm happy to do that later.
Yeah, SIG Network is our space to do our work, and that's fine. If you want to stick it up there, I guess I have no real objections. I'm still going to try to review it.
Okay. That's fine. I mean, obviously, it's not, a formal spec from Kubernetes. If it was, we would do a KEP and all that kind of stuff and go through that. So I didn't want to put it anywhere that was hugely Kubernetes blessed or official or anything like that. So.
Right. I think the right answer is in basically our specs and not looking like it's more than it is.
Right.
I'm fine with that.
Okay. So just to be clear, instead we'll try to put it on SIG Network community repo, right?
Sure.
Okay. All right. I will do it. Okay. If anybody has any other items, speak up. Otherwise, we will end this meeting early.
I'm back. I have a lot to catch up on. I apologize for being away so long, but I appreciate all your patience.
Hope it was a good vacation, Tim.
It was a good vacation. I kind of wish I was still there.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And the next meeting will be the 23rd of August. And note, I will not be able to make that meeting. So, Tim, either you or Casey will have to run that one.
Roger.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, everyone.